Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Tracy Spiagga with Slingshot Health Coaching. As a functional nutrition and lifestyle practitioner and brain health specialist and national board certified health and wellness coach, I work with individuals and families who are struggling with all types of mental health challenges. And as you can imagine, business is bursting at the seams, which is a blessing for me in that I get to help so many people, but also it's a little disheartening to know so many are struggling. Today, I decided to do a small portion of a very large presentation that I've given in the past, appreciating that our thought life, our beliefs, the stories we tell ourselves and the stories we live from really undergird every decision and choice we make every day, which those choices compound over time and really create the life that we're living. So it's really the best place to start when trying to understand who you are, why you are, where you are, how it is that you ended up a little bit stuck, and how can you reverse engineer your way to a better life. So let me just minimize this. Okay. So, you start off with behavior. Behavior is quite complicated. Brain health is critical to a well-lived life. And never before in recorded human history have we experienced a mental health crisis like we're experiencing today. And there's just so many variables that are at play when we're talking about the health of the brain. And these are just literally just a small fraction of the possible drivers of a brain that is struggling. I always list diet at the top because it is absolutely by far has the greatest impact on the functionality and the health of the brain in myriad ways, like speaking to nutrient deficiencies. If someone is consuming the standard American diet, the impact of that on the microbiome and the function of the immune system, sleep, exercise, infections, traumatic brain injury, toxicity. These are just some of the most common, but certainly the list is far from exhaustive. Okay, so everything begins with our thoughts, right? So I don't know if anybody's familiar with the term ANTS, automatic negative thoughts, when we all can slip into these kind of hamster wheel thought processes, and we just continue to think on something that is fear-driven, something that is in some way negative, and we start to carve out these grooves in our brains that cause us to really it's almost like when you're sinking in quicksand, and the harder you struggle, the deeper you sink. This is just the way the brain functions. In order to affect lasting behavior change, we have to kind of lift the hood, and we have to get to know ourselves well, understand why we think the way that we do, appreciate that every decision and behavior choice we make is preceded by a thought, and therefore we need to prioritize an honest examination of our thought life in order to manifest a better life that's filled with healthy relationships, not only to ourselves, but also to others. So the age-old question, why do I do what I do? We're going to go through a couple of scenarios that kind of unpack the process of how I guide people to explore themselves, get to know themselves better, and discover kind of root drivers to some stories and belief patterns that they hold. So do you find yourself asking this question maybe after you've done something undesirable for the umpteenth time? I think it's safe to say that we all do. It seems part of our DNA, but what if I told you that in part anyway, it is. There is a generational component to who you are, why you do what you do, why you think the way that you think. It's a nature-nurture combination. So let's take a look at three scenarios. One, you've had a very stressful day, so you cozy up in your PJs with a warm brownie or a delicious bowl of ice cream because after all, you totally deserve that. Or your husband asks what you perceive to be a scrutinizing question about a charge on the credit card bill, and you snap. And isn't he judging and micromanaging you? And then your child has been isolating more often, and you lash out at her because you perceive that she's rejecting you by not wanting to spend as much time with you. So let's kind of unpack these. We're going to unpack them by looking at the inner stories and beliefs that drive the way that we respond to life stressors and the way that we can easily misinterpret an exchange with somebody. So here's our first scenario, right? We had a really long day at work and cannot wait to get home, hop in our favorite chair with all of our favorite comfort foods. And, this is just what we do to kind of unplug and dissociate from the stress of our lives. So here's an example of a potential story for this particular woman who is sitting in the chair with the end of the day reward. Maybe she witnessed her mother work tirelessly in the home and her father never recognized, appreciate, or praise her. Perhaps in defense of her mother, this caused her to make a toxic inner vow that she'll never work that hard without some kind of reward or recognition. And this all, of course, is happening on a subconscious level. Now, as an overworked adult, that inner vow informs her knee-jerk nightly decision to relax with some junk food, feeling entitled to it. Later on, though, she feels regret as she battles stomach issues and inevitable creeping weight gain. Can you see how her story that was developed from childhood and created in defense of something bothersome to her is now not serving her well? It is not helping her, and it's actually driving a disease process of some kind. What might be a better story that she can tell herself? Again, this is part of a presentation that I do where I engage the audience. So we would banter about what might be a better story she can tell herself about having worked a long, hard day and start to kind of rip up from the roots the more toxic inner vow and replace it with something that actually begins to build her a better life. Here's our second scenario. So your husband asks about, what you experienced to be a scrutinizing question about a charge on the credit card bill, and you snap. Is he judging? Is he micromanaging? So let's take a look at a potential story that she's telling herself. Maybe she grew up in a home where money was tight, and as a result, she witnessed her parents argue a lot. Maybe her dad often questioned purchases her mom made, insisting that they weren't necessary. She'd see her mother shamed and angry. Being just a child and incapable of processing the stress in a healthy way, she unconsciously makes an inner vow that no man will ever tell her how she can spend her own money. Now, as a married woman, that toxic story is causing her to overreact to her husband's reasonable inquiry about a particular charge on the credit card. Again, what might have been a better story that she could tell herself? And how could she go all the way back, journeying all the way back to her childhood and uncover the root to the more toxic stories she tells herself, walling herself up from her life partner and creating discord and relational strain between the two of them? And lastly, we have the child who isolates more often, and the parent is experiencing that as rejection. So for this particular story, I take a look at a book called The 5 Love Languages. I would imagine many, if not all of you, are familiar with that. And if you're not, I would highly encourage you reading and applying the principles in the book. But it talks about the 5 ways that we all communicate and receive love, which they're really currency exchanges. So some people prefer physical touch, some acts of service, words of affirmation and praise, gifts, and time spent. So let's say this mom is a time spent currency person where she is unaware of this dominant love language. Naturally, when her daughter stops wanting to spend time with her, she feels rejected and unloved, and this causes a tremendous amount of pain for her. But the daughter, on the other hand, let's say she's a gifts currency. To her, spending time with people she loves isn't that high of a priority or a love language for her. Receiving a special surprise gift is one way she'd receive love from her mom, not so much snuggling up on the couch for a good movie. Can you see how the potential of their love language is clashing, and them not being aware of this concept of love language can cause strife in the relationship? And I liken it to being, from the States, vacationing over in Europe somewhere and trying to buy something with an American dollar where the vendor only accepts the euro. So the transaction is unsuccessful. The person wants to purchase something from the other, but the other will not give it because the currency is not of their preference. So, tying this together from the vantage point of the story the mom is telling herself that perhaps her daughter doesn't love her anymore, she'd likely be saying to herself, all that I do for her, how could she possibly reject me like this? What more does she want from me? She's hurt. So she lashes out at her daughter. And the daughter, having no understanding of why her mom is reacting so harshly, tells herself a similar inner story. Doesn't she know how exhausted I am from school and sports and clubs? Is it so wrong to want to spend a little time on my social media with my friends so I can relax a little bit? Why is she so needy? And round they go. In the moment, we all react and feel totally justified in the moment, right? But then it's always after the fact where we get out of our fear brain and we come back into our logic brain, where we oftentimes feel the wave of remorse and shame because of the way that we responded to someone we love. So, okay. So anyway, I'm going to kind of go through these a little quicker. So today's presentation, really, how does it relate to brain health? I'm speaking specifically to operating more from the frontal lobe and getting out of that fear brain. And the way to do that is to scrutinize your life, is to be brave, to partner with somebody like myself who has the skills to journey you back to your childhood and to uncover when you picked up certain beliefs and stories and help you see how you operate from those unhelpful stories today as an adult. And when we reveal the traumas, when we review them from an honest standpoint, we can then reframe them to speak to ourselves more truthfully. We can rewrite the stories that we live from and the beliefs that undergird all of our choices. And by that's how we redeem not only the current life we're living, but we redeem the generational impact that we manifest in our homes. And I've written a book that kind of unpacks this more deeply and points to some really helpful resources for a person to be brave enough to do the inner work. And anybody can find me at slingshothc.com and on social media handles as well.
Excellent. Any questions, anyone?
Yeah, Tracy, I'm going to guess you really didn't mention any real relationship between mental health and nutrition. And being that you are a nutrition coach, I'm guessing there's a connection.
Oh my goodness gracious. There's, aside from the stories we tell ourselves and the relationships in our lives, that by far is the primary driver of a brain that begins to really struggle. But second to that is absolutely the food that we put in our mouth every day. We have to understand that our body and brains are built by the food that we consume. So if we have a brain that's really having a hard time performing the way we prefer it to, the first thing we got to look at is our relationships to self and others. And then the second thing we got to look at is, what am I consuming each day? That I kind of liken it to, if you hire the most amazing contractor and you're willing to pay triple the going rate because you know the materials are going to be top quality, you're going to have an amazing outcome. But if you decide to really do maybe a DIY and you go dumpster diving and you're picking out materials from the curb or the dumpster, and you try to cobble together your project with materials like that, you're not going to end up with something that is satisfying or that's really going to serve or meet your needs. And as far as the body and brain go, we're out there gathering the raw material, and then the body is the contractor. So it only can build from the material that we give it. And so, yes, the food is absolutely critical.